Thank you very much, Madam Speaker, and I rise to speak in favour of the motion. I will be interested to hear what my honourable colleagues from the official opposition have to say as well. It would surprise me very much if there's a member of this Assembly that doesn't support expanding the number of communities served by school nutrition programs. It is something I think that is essential and fundamental. And, you know, we're here on Private Members Day to talk about private members' business. We've just come from, I think, a very productive discussion about the Bill 202 from the member for Bonnyville Cold Lake. Very cohesive, and I think we agree as members that together, irrespective of which side of the House we sit on, which party we represent, that we are going to work together to do things that are important for Albertans. And so while I do absolutely support this motion, I would say I am disappointed in the partisan tone that the member took, repeatedly taking shots at the official opposition and those of us on this side, repeatedly parroting the government's catchphrase for this particular budget cycle. I think that really doesn't serve the public interest in terms of what we're trying to achieve here. It takes away from the important issue of school nutrition. So while I support the principle behind this motion, and I will vote in favour of it, my question is the government's path, the only possible path to follow to achieve the outcomes? Is the government's sole job to build community? I think, and I would argue, that government typically doesn't do a great job in building community itself. I think it can create some of the structures to allow that to happen, but ultimately it's about community. It's about the people in the community that make it happen. So let me just get to first principles here, and that is, I think it is remarkable the impact that going to school hungry has on the inability for students to learn, which exacerbates and furthers a cycle of poverty, which means certain groups of students do not learn as well as others, and therefore find themselves, as they become adults, in a situation where they do not have the educational tools that they need to succeed, to break that cycle of poverty. So, school nutrition is really, really important in ensuring that every kid in this province has the equality of opportunity, has a chance for a great life. That's why I believe in public education. I think a high-quality public education system allows for that equality of opportunity. Not equality of result, necessarily. Ultimately, everybody needs to carve their own path, and you ought to be rewarded for your own honest efforts. But that's the whole idea behind the social contract that I think that we represent here in this Assembly, is that everyone ought to have the same chance in life, making sure that you don't go to school hungry, making sure that you have a great education system. That is our job. But the question is how. How do we go about doing this? And when the government comes in with a plan that's $10 million for pilot projects, which works out to, as I understand it, roughly $250,000 per school per year, when you have organizations like Brown Bagging It for Calgary's Kids, they provide 3,200 meals a day across 205 schools in Calgary and area. Using the metrics, $250,000 per school, if we were to multiply that by 205 schools served by Brown Bagging It, that would be $51 million per year. Brown Bagging It for Calgary's Kids serves 3,200 students a day in 205 schools, and they do that for $1.3 million. 1/50th, literally, the cost that this program would take. Now, that isn't to say that there's no place for a government funded program. It isn't to say that there's no place to ensure that gaps are filled. There isn't to say that the Brown Bagging It model would work perfectly everywhere else in the province. But I think it's incumbent on government to understand where there are volunteers willing to step up to help their neighbours, to help their community. That is community building. Organizations like Brown Bagging It for Calgary's Kids, and there are others, I Can for Kids is another one that I know about in Calgary, and I'm sure that there are other organizations elsewhere in the province that follow a similar model. They meet a need. They identify who needs help, and they provide that help. They don't create a need. They meet a need. They understand who needs that help, and they provide it. And they provide it in a way that engages further community members in solving a problem. There are hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of volunteers for Brown Bag It who put together the lunch packages. There's school nutrition education programs, and it is highly, highly successful. And they do all of that without a dime of government support. Now, there are cases, and I think this is one of them, where there's a role for the government to play in helping ensure that these sorts of programs are applied equally throughout the province. And I applaud the government for going down the path of at least trying to address this issue. There is a need to address this issue, so long as what the government does actually addresses the problem and is focused on addressing the issue, not on furthering a particular worldview and how things ought to work, not about just creating more jobs for government workers, not just about creating a larger footprint of government, where you have organizations that work well in the not-for-profit sector, relying on volunteer effort to help bring costs down and keep quality high. Those are models the government ought to be looking at. Be very, very careful about displacing any of these sorts of models that exist with government services, because they're incredibly efficient, incredibly effective. They do tremendous work. And not only do they solve that problem of child hunger, they build community. They build capacity in our community. They channel that natural, true Alberta instinct of helping our neighbours. They are remarkable people doing remarkable things in our community. So I will support this motion because I would be surprised if any member of this House would vote against a motion that resolves the Assembly to urge the government to consider expanding the number of communities that are served by school nutrition programs. That should be an imperative of this government and of any other. The question that is essential here is how we go about doing that. And my answer to that question is it's not either or. It is not just community and just not-for-profit. It is not just for government. It should be both. There is a need for both, but I urge the government to be very careful in how you go about doing that, to not cause structures that are expensive and clumsy and bureaucratic that may not fully solve the problem when you have very, very efficient and highly effective organizations that are doing this work already in Alberta, that have been created by hardworking, dedicated, thoughtful, community-minded people. Ask those people their opinion and their perspective, and I hope the government has done that. And I hope the government, if and when you are asking for the opinion and perspective of people who are already doing this work, I really hope you're listening to those folks, because they're tremendous people and they do great, great work. So I hope that we don't get bogged down in too much partisanship. That's part of this job that bothers me, that we get caught up in this stuff on the partisan side, but I really urge the government to make sure that your focus is in the right place. The focus is on building community and making sure that we're actually solving a problem in the most efficient and effective way possible. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.